patience.
No worries.
Yeah.
And after I will try that you will see, because normally it will be direct streaming. So just it's already, we published the link in Leonardo Lesser talk. So just, because I don't know, because unfortunately I will see, you see behind me the screen. So at least you will have some visible, some presentation of Joost and Frank, who will do, they prepared the images and they prepared the film, so just we will, well, just part of the.
Okay.
So, but you will see not very well, unfortunately, after, if you would like, just after
Yes.
it will be recorded and it will be put on internet site, so it's
Okay, that would be
so
good.
just you will
We'd
know
love
what it
to
was
look back on
projected,
it,
because
yeah.
otherwise what you see, it's behind me.
Yeah. Yep. What's in my silver doctor? Oh dear. Yeah.
But I will
That's
try we will try just to make you see what is happening behind, just like somehow like this.
Okay.
Okay, so just and Joost is also here. It's.
Yeah. There we
Hello.
go. You're there for real.
I'm here for real, yeah.
Yes.
Still nobody else, so we're here for real, but it doesn't really make a difference.
Well, which is to Oh, okay. I think that we. Hello. Just. I think now we can start. Just, I would like to invite our panelists to the table. Yes. Hello. So just we're waiting a little bit. I'm sorry. Just that people are coming slowly, but I think that we can already start today our evening. So I would like just to do a small introduction. This is the Laser Talk Brussels, and this is our fourth meeting. So just we already have done 3 before, and it was one at Sensational Skin, woven by nature with Anna Mimas, Camila Colomba, and second was Light Time and collaboration between art and science with Ulrike Küchner, Paul Malone, and Els van Riel. Third one, it was notion of transhumanism, and it was Mark Kuckelberg, Peter Fries, and Angela Vermolen. And so now today we are introducing another subject, and it will be out-of-control-ness and the emergence of possibilities. So Laser Talk, I will not stay long, just to tell that Laser Talk, this is a big net of the collaboration between different organizations. All general name Laser Talks, but after Laser Talks has in Paris, in New York, and Chicago, in Berlin, so we are in Brussels. And Laser Talks, this is one of the program of Leonardo magazine. Leonardo magazine, also few words if somebody don't know, this is a very interesting publication that more or less bringing together artists, philosophers, and scientists, so to create this bridge between all these fields, because this is also completely artificial, that it was disconnected for several years, and so now we more or less working just to bring all these people together and to discuss subjects that happen in the world, but all together. And so, and I would like to introduce you immediately our collaborator. This is Edith Dove. She is working with us already for all these events, and she part of the Laser Talk Brussels. And Edith Dove, she will be moderator of this talk. So I would like to give you parole, so just you can continue.
Okay, very sorry not to be there, but thanks to COVID, I would say, which I don't have, but anyway, won't go into the details for that. So as Alexandra said, this is the 4th talk in the series, and we're discussing notions of out-of-control-ness, which, so me being not in Brussels is very much apt, I would say, in a social and technical context that are at the core of the work of the 3 panelists. Professor Dr. Francis Brazier, who's a full professor in engineering systems foundations at Delft University of Technology, and who is joining us from the UK. And visual artists Joost, Rekveld, and Frank Thijs, who are sitting on either side of Alexandra. So Francis Brazier approaches the subject through a research into social systems and connects out-of-control-ness with the notion of emergence and new possibilities, the empowerment of people in change management. For Joost Rekveld, the notion of out-of-control-ness is related to his research into analog computing, its history and culture, pushing the limits of its affordance. And for Frank Thijs, it's related to the current state of affairs of the world and global warming, which is the subject of his latest interactive multimedia installation, Chronicle of an Extinction Foretold, which can be seen at Z33 in Hasselt at the moment. Now, what connects all three of them is maybe, and maybe you're, you don't agree with that, but that would then be a good subject for our discussion later. Connected to the notion of out-of-controlness are chaos theory that was developed for modeling unpredictability and the so-called Lorentz attractor that was meant to be used to solve chaotic problems. Due to its shape of the attractor, that which reminds of butterfly wings, this led to the idea of the butterfly effect, which has been used and misused since then. James Scott, in Seeing Like a State, mentions a list of measures intended to control chaos. I have this from an article by Michael Setbon, who's an artist, a French artist. The creation of permanent last names, the standardization of weights and measures, the establishment of cadastral surveys and population registers, the inventions of freehold tenure, the standardization of language and legal discourse, the design of cities and the organization of transportation, and it all didn't help. So the need for control then leads to cybernetics, which was developed as a control over complex systems and was defined by Norbert Wiener as the scientific study of control and communication in the animal and the machine. But the use of system thinking could also be used, or can also be used, in a creative way and a sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of way, as demonstrated by the French Oulipo group, or Ouvrage de littérature potentielle, set up by Raymond Queneau and the mathematician François Le Lyonnais in 1960 as a subdivision of the Collège de Pataphysique, and with famous members such as Georges Perec, Italo Calvino, and Marcel Duchamp. Just to say that out-of-controlness is a fairly complex item. Now, to talk about the panelists, I will first introduce them a bit further and then have them present or answer questions. Francis Brazier, as said, is a full professor in engineering systems at Delft University of Technology, and as of September 2009, before which she chaired the Intelligent Interactive Distributed Systems Group for 10 years within the Department of Computer Science at the VU University Amsterdam. She holds MCC in mathematics and a doctorate in cognitive ergonomics from the VU Amsterdam. Parallel to her academic career, she co-founded the first ISP in the Netherlands, NLNet, and later NLNet Labs. And with a strong background in the design of human-computer interaction, multi-agent systems, and distributed systems, current research focuses on the design of socio-technical ecological systems that enable and support participation in today's networked society, participatory systems. The leading design principles include design for trust, design for empowerment, and design for engagement. Areas of study and exploration include distributed energy management, crisis management, dynamic supply chain management, and real-time safety management. Joost Rekveld is an artist motivated by the question of what we can learn from a dialogue with machines. In his work, he explores the sensory consequences of systems of his own design, often inspired by forgotten corners in the history of science and technology. His films, installations, and performances are composed documentaries of the worlds opened by such systems. His abstract films have been shown worldwide in a wide range of festivals and venues for experimental film, animation, or other kinds of moving image. He has realized several installations and was involved in many collaborative projects involving composers, music ensembles, theater companies, dance companies, and artist labs. Since February 2017, he's affiliated to the School of Arts, University College Ghent as an artistic researcher. And Frank Thijs is a filmmaker and visual artist. His work is always accompanied by a thorough investigation in domains where social and technological factors become intertwined, which in turn influences the form of the work and the media used. His experimental films, performances, documentaries, and new media installations were internationally awarded and acquired for the collections of, amongst others, SMAC in Ghent, the Museum for the Moving Image in New York, and the Centre National de la Cinématographie in Paris. Frank Thijs has taught at the Film and the Visual Arts departments of LUCA Ghent and Brussels, at Das Theater Amsterdam, Master's Degree Performing Arts, at the Art Science Interfaculty of the Royal Academy in The Hague, and has been a visiting teacher and lecturer at universities, film art and theater schools worldwide. He currently is a researcher at the University of Louvain and teaches video and performance at the Open Lab in PXL MAD, Hasselt, Belgium, where he founded Digimat, a platform for art and science collaborations. Now, as a first question, it's probably good to discuss what out-of-control-ness means for each one of you. As indicated, Francis, you approach this from a social context with a focus on positive outcomes, whereas Joost uses it in the context of analog computing and the observation of systems that go out of control, using this in a creative way. And Frank, you observe this notion perhaps in a much more pessimistic way, as demonstrated in your video trilogy, Technocalypse from 2006, and the expansive growth of non-biological or artificial intelligence. But we'll start with Francis. In a preparatory conversation, you said you teach your students that complex systems will not do what they think they will do, and that out-of-controlness can lead to the emergence of possibilities. Can you expand on that and give some examples of projects in which this approach is used? Oh, we don't hear you.
Talking to myself again. Okay, thank you. Out-of-controlness, or even the whole notion of being in control, actually we're never in control. And that's something I really do try to get across. We try and coordinate things. We come up with rules of game. We come up with rules of thumb to try and coordinate activities, but we're never really in control. I mean, there's a storm raving on outside. I assume this house will stay in place, but I have no guarantees, right? So we design for the forces we know of, the known unknowns or the unknown knowns, but we don't know what we don't know. And so that's something we do try to get across, especially if designing social technical systems. I have been cited somewhere that you can't build a complex system from scratch, but that's in the context of a very closed, a very well-defined system. I believe you can, but you have to realize that, and this is what I'm teaching my students, that things will never be what you believe they're going to be. People don't act the way you expect them to act. And they will always act differently. New materials will emerge. So even if you're designing an aircraft, before you're done, there will be other options and other possibilities. So you have to design for change. I mean, you said it's change management's even, you don't even know what's going to happen. And artists such as you, well, I'm not, but I do have 2 PhD students at the moment who are renowned artists, Angelo Vermeulen and Karen Lonsell and Herman Maat. They design disruption, basically. And that's what I've now learned, that art is disruption. So you're purposely disrupting the way the world's viewed. Angelo, with his biomod, takes old materials and something magical emerges in biological systems with old computers and waterworks and everything else. The notion being that we're trying to embrace emergence. So what does that mean to embrace emergence? He's also working on a starship that evolves in space. How does that work? How could that work? We don't know, but we do know that whatever we come up with will be a first step in that direction and things will change. If we look at Karen and Herman's work, their work is looking at brainwaves and BCIs and how you disrupt the senses and what information we're retrieving and how it all gets mixed up. So they're purposely disrupting the world. Whereas in my systems and energy management and traffic management and crisis management, we try to embrace the situation to make the most of it, but realizing, you said very positively, yes, I am very positive, but I do realize there is the back door, and we do have to deal with safety and security, because people will not flourish if they don't feel safe. So we do have to ensure the feeling of safety, realizing that the feeling of safety isn't the same as safety, because we also know from our work in Rotterdam that the areas where people feel least safe are the areas that they're actually most safe, according to the statistics. So what does it mean to design for the feeling of safety? And it would be good if you back that with real safety. But these types of things, realizing these issues are different, is really important when you're designing these systems, as in, what are you trying to achieve? How could you achieve it? Any designer will tell you that, you know, what you shouldn't be doing, but what you should be doing is often unknown. You're exploring your options and potential, whether it's an aircraft or whether it's agriculture. It's a question of what questions should people be asking? How should they be asking them? And what are the options? So that means even if I'm working with people who are designing aircraft or forms of transportation, you have your standard way of thinking. Think out of the box, start reflecting, thinking about what your possibilities are. And yes, I understand that we don't want aircraft falling out of the air. That's not a good idea. So it does have to work physics-wise. But what are in our preparatory talk, I told you about a session I gave, the workshop I gave in Toulouse with professors my age and young students, and said, you want to come from the Pyrenees down to Toulouse, design some form of transportation. But it wasn't until we narrowed that down, giving them so many constraints, that the professors came up with creative ideas. The first thing they said, oh, one of those flying aircraft will suffice. Whereas the students came up with a glass Zeppelin that would be sustainable and people would be able to enjoy the experience. They came up with something magical. But that means, how do we encourage this magical, think out of the box way of thinking, to embrace the fact that things will change and that you're not in control and you can't possibly be in control. Having said that, when we're designing for social cohesion in the cities, I do have a very diverse group of PhD students with serious games in the city. We can't have children walking around the city and not be safe. But how can we make them feel free to explore and still guarantee, at least support safety in some way, that they're safe to wander around the neighborhood and explore the options, and only to discover they think the big garbage can is the best place in the whole neighborhood because it's nice and shiny. I mean, things like this that's their perspective of their world. So what could we be doing with that? So I think the challenge is in all of these things, in the design of all of these systems, not to follow what we believe to be the truth in the sense of this is the framing we need. No, drop that framing and come up with ways to deal with the fact that things will never be the way you think they should be. And so I'm basically saying the only thing you have are your values. You have a mission with your system. You have the values you wish to embrace. And if safety is important, safety will be embraced. And the only thing you know is it will change, and you have to come up with a way to coordinate. And it really is these coordination mechanisms. In politics, they're often called governance, but what is the coordination? How can you coordinate? What rules of thumb can you, and you know people won't stick to rules, but as much as they can, how can you go about designing, but also how can you go about implementing your system so that it will change, that you know it will change and allow it to change? So that's the way I think about emergence and out-of-control-ness. We know it's not going to do what we want it to do. So now the way we'll do what we want it to, that it won't do it the way we think it will do it ahead of time.
It's interesting that you bring up safety. Having worked in the UK in an art school, I was flabbergasted by the very strict safety rules in the UK, where you can't use a ladder unless you had an introductory course how to use one, even though you know how to use one, and where all kinds of things were absolutely forbidden. I once, in my innocence, was really very enthusiastic about a student who thought it was a good idea to bring in molded wallpaper and was almost fired because of that, because it was a serious health issue. How do you deal with that? I mean, you're teaching mainly in Holland. Maybe there the rules are less strict, but if you want to go out of control, those kind of things, especially in an art school, that was really difficult to get people to think practical.
As you mentioned, we set up the internet in the Netherlands and in Europe and actually across the world. We had a UCP protocol. We didn't design the protocols, we designed its use. And we weren't allowed to transmit data over telephone lines. It was just, you weren't allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
But we did it anyway, we just found a way around it, right?
Yeah.
That was institutional voids is the nice word for it. There are no institutions, there are no governance rules, so you find a way around it. And there's all these disruptive technologies, they're not disruptive. There's just different ways of approaching different challenges with which we're faced. And so we wanted to connect, and we had wire along the train lines, and we used it, and we used UCP. And yes, you had to bounce every message, for those of us who are as old as I, you had to bounce every message across the world and knowing every machine. That got automated. But the notion of this is what we want to do, you make it work.
Yep.
So you sometimes have to interpret rules carefully.
Well, it seems to connect to the Oulipo way of thinking. So using system thinking in a creative kind of way, and not seeing it as a barrier, but as a challenge rather. So we'll keep that thought, and I'll first go to Frank. In Technocalypse from 2006, you observed the connection between space exploration and religion that seems to go out of control. And you use at one point a famous painting by Hieronymus Bosch as an illustration. You also refer to him as and to Bruegel as well in your most recent interactive installation, Chronicle of an Extinction Foretold, which I had hoped to see tomorrow, but I'll hope to see it in January when I try again to cross the border. Yeah, this live computer simulation shows over about 20 minutes how life on Earth will evolve in the next century due to global warming. Can you expand or maybe present on how out-of-controlness is involved in these projects and why you return to Bosch and Bruegel to illustrate it?
That's a long. I'm also going to answer very long. Closer, even more close. In fact, when I was thinking when Francis was talking about how to balance out things, and so I've been quite following for the past decades people who do the opposite, who still believe that they are absolutely sure that we still can control the things. So in this documentary that I made, Technocalypse, all these transhumanists, they know that we're gonna change humans and we're still gonna keep control. And also with climate change, we have now people who think like we're gonna control it, we're gonna do geoengineering and control it by adding stuff in the atmosphere, other stuff. There is one Alex Pentland, he is the head of big data at MIT, and he wrote a book, The Social Physics, wherein he writes that from now on, thanks to big data, he believes that we will be able to do social science with the same exactitude as we do natural sciences, so that we will come up, thanks to big data, with universal laws, how we can predict society. So here we see again more and more of this hypermodernism of controlling the things. And it reminds me of a short story of Borges with a fantastic title, Uncertainty, where he describes a kind of culture that is specialized in map making. So they make maps of the world, of their country, and they can do it very precise, and they really specialize, and they do it more and more, so they can do it on higher and higher resolution, until the ultimate map that they make, it's on a one-on-one scale. So they make a map of their entire country exactly the way that their country is on exactly the same scale. Now the problem is that, of course, it was in the way for everyone, because everywhere where you would walk, you would step on that map. And so finally they couldn't use it, and it started to rot because of the rain and so, and all the different parts of or so remained always somewhere in the corners or so, but they left making maps. I think that what this Alan Pentland with his big data is the same thing. They think in terms of, it's a kind of transcendent way of thinking. So you have your control, and that control stays above the world. They don't think that their big data is part of the world. It's somewhere hidden in very safe factories, but it's above us. And from there, we can control this world downstairs. But that's not the way it is. It's just like that map that is rotting. Their big data, and we see it with Facebook and with all these big companies, their data are reused and re-injected. What they know, they re-inject in this world. And so if you want to control this world, you need a meta computer with their big data to understand this big data. But if that's the case, then you will need another meta computer to understand that. And so there's a complexity of that we're facing today. I think it's in a kind of exponential growth of data that will be a total overconsumption, where finally all this big data will stay rotten somewhere in corners because we cannot use it anymore, because we cannot control it anymore. This was not my answer. Well, it was my answer, but you want to know more about why. In fact, I'm interested in this kind of thinking, and so I see it in several ways where, for me, which is a crash between the kind of modernist way of thinking, which today is a hyper-modernist way of thinking, that we still can control it, against another way that I think is more familiar to what Francis described, and how to deal with that. So, but I'm not so positive in how it's evolving, because I see that all these evolutions are evolving in an exponential way, and we have all these hockey stick evolutions where one moment it will end in some total chaos. And that's what I see with now in this installation that I made about climate change. I used all the data of the IPCC and other data, and but I also wanted to have social influences in it. And the last report of the IPCC, the 6th report, which is now just out, is for the first time that the IPCC also calculated socio-economic factors in the report, and I was very, very curious. So they gave me all their data, but first they had all the physical data, and then I was waiting for when the social part would come and how they would link it with the other ones. And then I was very disappointed, because it turns out, okay, they made all the physical ones, and then they made social scenarios, and they're not connected. So they have like 5, well, they also they're doing extra scenarios, but basically 5 scenarios for the physical, with a best case where we stay under 2 degrees, and a worst case where we go up to 5.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And then we have 5 socio-economic scenarios. One is the green road, the other one is the neoliberal free market world economy. The other one is the more nationalist, protectionist way, an authoritarian way, and the middle of the road. And they calculate, like, if the whole world for the whole century would take the green road, then we will arrive there. If we take the whole world economy, open economy, neoliberal way, then we will end up in worst case scenario. But so it's a one way of thinking, where while you have to think these things in a more dynamic way. Once you have open society, and worst case, at one moment you will have conflicts where the climate really smashes the society. You will have migration, you will have other countries where they block the borders, and where you will have nationalist parties winning the elections. And so it's a very dynamic way. And when you see the dynamic way, I've been talking also with people from the army. During the opening, I invited Roger Hausen, who was a conflict analyst of the NATO, specialized in climate change, and he also gave a speech about where. But I discussed with him. He was one of my advisors. Like, where will conflicts occur because of climate change? And so you have at really everywhere in the world around the equator. So but everything moves up until when it's 4 degrees higher. No humans can live under Canada, under Belgium, under Siberia, and on the south side above Tasmania and New Zealand. So what is going to happen when those are the locations, and that 4 degrees, that can happen by the end of this century. So can you imagine what will happen? Now the problem is that when I talk to people about climate, and also with politicians, I was in the Beaux-Arts in another debate where people say you have to stay optimistic also, because otherwise they will, people will not vote for you. But I think, well, that's the problem. Voltaire was an optimist, maybe. Well, he wrote a novel about optimism, where he was joking about people, and so he was someone of the Enlightenment, you know, one of the leaders of the Enlightenment. But he warned for optimism. So people who are optimistic today, they are the Trumps and the Bolsonaros of the world. I really don't see an optimism. With now this COP26, people hoping like, well, we will get 27, 28, and people will see that it's really getting serious, and they will take better measures. I think the opposite, because it will get worse. We will get more crises, and they will just go for their own. So I'm not so optimistic about it.
And Bos and Breugel are a good way to express that, to go back to your pessimism, actually.
Sorry?
Well, to go back to my initial question, I mean, you use old painters like Bos and Breugel,
yeah.
And they are a good way of expressing it. I don't know if you wanted to share images of your work or not, but...
I have a few images in my presentation, but I didn't prepare.
Can you do the presentation? Yeah.
Well, I didn't know exactly what you were. So to present myself, I have actually, and I brought in a PDF with a bit from the very start of my artistic career, because I use that for my students to present my own work. But you should go to the end, Alexandra, to see some works of here. This is the end. This is a triptych. Can you go down and show this? Yeah. No, maybe go 2-3 pages more up. More. Sorry. Okay, this is it. Yeah, this page. So here you see. So what I made is a big table with which is a triptych. So the 3 flat screens with the world map on it, and but it's a 3D world map. So you cannot see it so much here, but it's a computer simulation. Inside there's a computer running, and every 20 minutes it gives a new simulation. so we use all the data of the IPCC and many others. For months I've been also making spreadsheets of a lot of things that I found on the internet of data of things. So with the team of 3D animators, I've been working for a year on it. And it shows from 2000 until 2100. So all the conflicts that happened so far, hurricanes, wildfires, and how it will evolve. Finally, we had to reduce it a bit because the computer absolutely couldn't follow anymore. But it shows a little bit like strategy games. So with little people walking around. So you see farmers, you see migrants, you see gangs and a war, tourists. There are just a few. So it's also with the touch screen, so you can point on a place and then it will zoom in on that place. And then this is just something a sidekick. This is a screen. So we had all this data of the IPCC, and we turned them back into the map. And so this is an interactive map where you can scroll from the beginning of the century until the end of the century. For example, for population, for a chance for wildfires, for precipitation, all this kind of data to see how it evolves. And then we created all these little characters, like people who would protest, and when there is then police and they come too short, the police would automatically fight, and then they would knock down some people, others would run away, and it's just programmed that it happens. And so to test these kind of things, I placed some of my characters in a 3D environment, and then that was for me very weird in the sense that I was really in a virtual world where I saw these people, my people that we created, walking around and getting confronted with one another. And every time that I found something that the kind of situation that I found special, I took a virtual picture. And so I also showed there some of these pictures of my encounter in cyberspace. And this is a very end of the 20 minutes when it ends in a smoky world.
Okay, thank you. We'll also keep that in mind, but if possible, I would first like to go to Joost, because time is running fast. Joost, you use the out-of-control-ness of now often obsolete analog computing to create abstract images. You commented in an earlier conversation that you are rediscovering ideas from the world of cybernetics that is usually defined as the science of communications and automatic control systems in both machines and living things or animals that seem to have been forgotten. Can you explain in which way these ideas are still interesting and how they can be connected to your use of out-of-control-ness? And I think you probably also have a presentation. So
yeah, I'm a bit thinking perhaps it's better to start with the presentation and do it a bit fast.
Yeah,
you
sure.
know a little bit what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And also get a bit the images of the end of human civilization out of our head for a little bit.
Just for 20 minutes and then that's fine.
Yeah, if you can do it full screen. Okay. So I don't know if you also see them aided actually, but
I can see the bit. Yeah.
Okay, just to go completely back to what I do, I make abstract films. I will go very fast because otherwise, I already warned people that I'm not very good at giving a very short presentation of in 10 minutes. But basically, when I was making films, I make animated abstract films. At some point, I realized that I always make my own tools. This is one of my setups, which is like 20 years ago, and this is involving optics, also a setup which I made to just create certain types of images. And while making these tools, I basically realized that what I find really interesting is that these tools do things I cannot imagine. So it's not that I want to make these tools to be in control and make the images I have in mind, but I make these tools just to actually discover things and find out things I don't know. So that's how I got also really interested in the history of technology. This is, for instance, one of these optical images. I got into coding. So first I built my machines, mechanical, optical, and then I got into making machines and software, basically. So I was making all kind of artificial life type simulations of emergent systems, like with many particles or crystallization, all mostly based on scientific models taken from physics or biology. So this is the kind of stuff I was doing. And then at some point, this is also, these are optical simulations. So basically what I do here, I use some kind of model, and then I exploit it, and I'm basically looking for corners of things which I don't, where it sort of, where these models for me don't really predict anymore what's going to happen, so where you can really discover corners. For instance, this is based on the optics of the same things which happens in rainbows, like diffraction patterns, for diffraction on very small particles. So you get these very interesting regions. And at some point I got really interested again to go back to like building physical stuff, and I got really interested in electronics, and then also in the history of that, so the whole history of analog modeling, analog simulation. And what I find interesting about that history is that it's really a point where you have the world of the material, like stuff, electronic components, where it sort of meets the world of mathematics and simulation and equations, and also the worlds of control and cybernetics. So I got really into that history of analog computing, also in the sort of the more conceptual history of it. And then what I found also really interesting is that if you look at the electronic arts, that the first simulations which you could do in real time were electronic simulations. So you have this idea of lightning empiricism developed at the time, so that you basically make some kind of electronic system which behaves like a complex system you can interact with, so that you can also get a sense of the system on a sort of more physical level or in an interactive way, which is a notion which then comes back later in the history of electronic arts in the world of synthesizers, like audio synthesizers and video synthesizers. So you have this idea of the user, of the artist as part of the feedback loop, which then creates the images. So I got really interested in this analog computing. So this is me in the same. So I got also really hands-on. So I repaired this thing. This is an analog computer from 1962. And then I built my own, but then with components of now. So instead of like these old ones, they are very precise, but they're also very slow. They can simulate, all kinds of physical systems. And I made one which is basically the same idea, but then using technologies of now, so you can actually use them in much higher frequency, so that they can actually also generate video signals. You can use it as a kind of synthesizer for high definition video. So this is how it looks in use. And then I want to talk about 3 projects. I mentioned 3 projects I've been working on. And then also to talk a bit about 2 kinds of out-of-controlness. So I talked about making tools as a way to discover systems, and that's also this idea of this interactive simulation, that you simulate a system of equations, for instance, on this analog computer, and then by interaction you get a kind of feel for the system. So that's one way of out-of-controlness. Another way of out-of-controlness is that you really go into the history of that stuff. So this is my studio at the moment. So there's also part of it is collecting old gear. And if you start collecting this old gear from the 70s, this high-end gear is all military, or a lot of it is military. So it means that sort of 1/3 of the stuff I have in my studio is actually military gear. So you have stuff from Los Alamos. This is from the Naval Research Laboratories, which is one of the big drivers of development of technology, because they sponsored a lot of innovation. which was for me, you know, I'm a sort of a harmless abstract filmmaker, so I was a bit shocked by that. You get also all kind of ethical issues if you need parts, because some of these parts are still in stock, but then with military vendors, which like people who sell parts of jet aircraft, for instance, but then they also have this one part you need for your analog computer. Do you buy that or not? Or do you try to find a more friendly source? And then I found this device, which is a device which is used in also for to interface between the world of analog electronics and flight simulators. So it's basically, it also says there it's compatible with F-18 aircraft cockpits. And I use this device to make a film. So one big input into the film was that military history of this technology. That is basically what the kind of computing technologies we have are basically side effects of the technology which was developed during the Cold War as part of the sort of global surveillance system to guard against nuclear attacks. So that's one input, and the other input was Francis already mentioned chaos. Edith mentioned it, chaos theory. And then one of there's basically two origin narratives of chaos. One is Konrad Lorenz, who discovered this butterfly effect. And another one is Yoshisuke Ueda, who's a Japanese scientist who also developed chaos, discovered chaos more or less at the same time, in 1962, but on an analog computer. So I started on these analog computers, simulating all kind of chaotic equations, all kind of systems. Developed my own one. This is one I developed, and then these two things sort of come together in a film. I've almost finished. It's in a way my first feature film. It's almost 70 minutes, and it's basically an abstract science fiction film which deals with these two things. So on one hand, the idea of a global surveillance system during the Cold War, and on the other hand, the emergence in systems which are thought to be in control of behaviors which are actually provable chaotic and in some sense not at all controllable. So these are some stills from the film. So it's all made using these analog computers and this flight simulator device. So that's the third notion of out-of-control-ness, is chaos. Well, I think I'm gonna just skip this one. It's a piece, and I just want to go to the last project I'm working on really at the moment. It's a project which is I basically just started. I'm really interested in this cybernetics. I will come to your question, Edith, in a minute. And one of the things I'm doing at the moment is basically sort of reconfiguring this analog equipment I have. So just a part of it, what you see on the left. And on the right, what you see is basically a sort of very big surplus video switchers. And basically what I'm doing is that I'm setting up a system where I can evolve, like I can use evolutionary algorithms to let basically the algorithms find the right connections for my analog computing so that it generates images which I find interesting. So the idea is that I'm also at the moment writing a thesis, that I can next door write a thesis, and that's in the room, in the studio, the machines are basically figuring out my next film and just making it. I'm just gonna quit this, yeah. Was that too long?
No.
So then to come back to your question, like why am I now reading this cybernetics? It's basically, there's a few reasons, but I think I've been interested in the history of cybernetics for a very long time, mostly because it's, I think, a very good example of how, like I think you, Frank, talked about sort of disconnect between thinking about technology and thinking about human affairs, like how these two worlds are actually the same world. And I think cybernetics is a very good, it's always about the control. It's basically, cybernetics is the idea that You can use machines as an analog for thinking about what humans do or human societies, but also the other way around. So that because in a way there's lots of mechanisms, or there's algorithms, or there's models which apply to both worlds. So that's one very interesting thing about cybernetics, that it's really at the root of this idea that these two worlds are in fact one, or share a lot of characteristics. And as an artist, what I find super inspiring about cybernetics is that it's a science where a lot of the early sort of heroes or scientists, especially in British cybernetics, they built a kind of philosophical machines. They built models which were physical devices, which for them also were a way to explore certain hypotheses, but which also sort of act as philosophical statements almost. So I find that's a very interesting notion as an artist. So that's the second reason. And the third reason, I think, is that if you well, cybernetics, I think, is very broad. Like, I've been reading a lot of these sort of old tomes of, conference proceedings, and then you find that it's really, at that time, it was very interdisciplinary, but also really a mixed bag. So there's, like, I think 80% of what happened in those early conferences of cybernetics is also really about control, and about, like what Frank mentioned, like people really believing in this idea of control. And then there's a few other ones, and then especially I'm reading lately a lot of the work of Gordon Pask and Stafford Beer and Heinz von Förster, these kind of people. And there's a sort of short window, I think, at the moment also where, it was still not sure if computers were going to be digital or analog or hybrid. There's a sort of short window around 1960 of a couple of years where a lot of these devices were made, and where there's also a kind of vision of that it perhaps would be possible to make machines which are very different than the machines we have now around us. And and I think that's a very interesting period, where, frankly, also I realized that if I really want to think about this idea of a dialogue with machines, I have to go through that period, because so many things happen there. And there's also, for instance, Catherine Hales, who wrote a beautiful book about cybernetics and posthumanism. She sort of looks at that period and really sees it as a period where kind of notions of posthumanism, what's now called posthumanism, were sort of pioneered. There's Andrew Pickering, who looks also at that period and sees it as, especially like if you think of Stafford Beer and Gordon Pask, that these machines were perhaps models of really a very different type of technology. And what I find intriguing is that these are two like really large claims on that period. So that's basically the reason I'm reading all this stuff now, is that I find it super interesting, but I also want to know if that's actually true, and if that's if that's a valid way to look at these things, and if these models which were developed then still have relevance today.
Yes, I realized that all three of you approach out-of-control-ness maybe out of very different kind of ways. Maybe you and Francis more from a positive kind of viewpoint in which things can be discovered and can be challenged, whereas Frank is clearly very pessimistic, observing. Is there a way of how we can bring this together one way or the other? I mean, if Joost says, well, I'm curious to see where this leads to, whether these machines are still valid. I see that Francis made a gesture, but do you want to respond?
Yeah. Actually, he's using the data that's out there to feed into the information you have, right? So the big data is providing the information of what the world could possibly look like, and it's predicting. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's negative. The outcome might very well be very negative. And I think the challenge is how to create that awareness. People will not, top down is not going to work. We know that. So I'd be looking at it more as, okay, and how can we now create that awareness bottom up? And I think half the world's looking at that as well. But the fact that it's not the big, you began by saying big data are ruining the world. Big data are also feeding into providing the information we need to know what possible consequences could be of all sorts of events. And are our models correct? Probably not, but at least they're giving us some information. So the data is providing some of this information. Whether, as I said, it probably won't be correct, but it's better than none. And for the predictions about how people are going to react, yeah, that's a different story. You're not going to get that out of the data.
Well, yeah, well, there I agree. That, when I say that I'm pessimist, or when you say that I'm a pessimist, more than I would say it for myself.
I wouldn't say you're a pessimist.
But
you hear me say that.
No.
Yeah. Realist, yeah.
But it was maybe a realist also. But so with the opening of my exhibition, so this Roger Hausen was there, and he made two interesting comments. One was that about climate change, that in fact the Arab Spring, and what was later called the Arab Winter, because the way that it turned out, was caused by 5 years of drought in the region. And that it's just because all the farmers, they gave up and they went to the cities and they tried to find work in the cities, and they couldn't, and so they were starving, and they started to protest. With
the technology was the enabler. If there had not been Twitter, there wouldn't have been an Arab Spring. So the technology made it possible for them to...
No, but so and the Arab Spring is fantastic, but if what he said is that because we knew that there was this crisis, if there would have been much more help from the world society, then there wouldn't have been. Well, we wouldn't have the Arab Spring, but we also wouldn't have the Arab Winter. Which is funny that so he said that because of this climate change, the only way really to help the world is to get this solidarity. Which was funny that half an hour later he started to say the other thing about Russia and about the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic Sea. Where he was thinking in total different terms, like we need to win that against the Russians. And so I don't think so that we should still think in these terms of being the winner also. So with all this data, we know a lot more, but when we keep on thinking in terms of who's going to be the winner, we're not going to make it. It's exactly the same with COVID now. We see now with COVID, so if we don't help the third world with vaccines, now again the United States, they bought 2/3 of all the pills that are available for COVID for them. But whatever that they're going to consume all the pills, then finally we will still have COVID. It's not going to get solved this way. So it's not about them and us anymore, and that's a difficult one for a lot of people apparently. So that's also my pessimism.
Joost, how do you see the connection between the three of you? If there is one.
No, I think it's I was a bit worried. I was happy Frank started to talk about that there are people who still believe in control, because I was very worried that we would all be agreeing. It would be a very boring discussion. But no, I really liked Francis' opening statement about that the whole idea of control is somehow that we are not in control, and I think that's a really interesting idea. Like for instance, I was looking, I'm really sort of burrowing in these books about the history of electronics, and then for instance, if you find out about the history of the discovery of the transistor, it's almost as if these labs and all these things which happen in these labs just have their own behavior. There's wires, and then some human walks in and crosses the wires wrongly, and then the transistor works, and it's like, hey, this works. what just happened? We just invented the transistor, and then they crossed them back like the way it was originally planned, and it doesn't work anymore. So there's a couple of these moments, and I find it's really interesting if you look at the history of discovery or invention. It's almost always that something was actually invented for something else, and then they found out, we can use it for this. Or you invent something, and then there's a whole process of sort of fine-tuning, and then after 20 years it turns out that it's also possible to use it for something else. So I find this history of, like, there's this sort of heroic history of mostly like white men sort of in labs, discovering things. Whereas in fact it's much more complicated, and the things they discover are just, very often mistakes, or things which are invented for other things, or things which are only possible in that lab because there's so much stuff already happened before stuff actually was on the table in front of them. So I find that's super interesting, and I think that's something which, there's a kind of, a feeling perhaps, or an intuition which I think we all share, that there's this kind of, that the sort of narrative of the human brain sort of determining all these things, that's just completely wrong.
Yeah, and it's maybe that realization that's by accident, hopefully, will come up with some kind of solution of the difficult period we're finding ourselves in, and the upcoming century. I'm also fairly realist about that, to be honest. Did you want to say something, Frank, or because you're holding the mic?
Oh, no.
I just gave it to him. Sorry.
I can say something if you want.
Yeah, I don't know if there are questions from the audience that I can't see, but
I'll pass the mic.
Is there an audience?
Hello,
apparently there's an
Hello, that's Peter. Hello, Edith. I was just wondering, I learned a lot this evening because you have different perspectives, how you approach this being out of control as a normal state of life, if you want. I think what we see today is many people actually use it the other way, saying, I propose an easy solution. And then we have radicalism, we have the app culture where everything can be solved in an app. And basically where people thinking out of control is actually what it is sort of reality. Those people are being considered dangerous or counterproductive, which I think is a pity and is of course completely ridiculous. So what would be your take on that?
Could you repeat the question?
Would you like to take the question?
Could you repeat the question?
Repeat the question?
Yeah. The question is basically that why you're advocating for open up mind, perspective, and what can be done in new avenues. Other people, politicians, whatever you want, they go the opposite. They're saying, let's close it down, and I propose an easy solution. I propose an app culture or just a simple argument, and I propose that it's going to work, right? We all know it's not going to work. So from a perspective of scientists, of artists, what would you propose, or can that be mitigated, this negative approach, I would say?
Well, several of my works are in fact about that, to observe how these things evolve, how people deal with things. I give a few examples. So there's a Technocalypse about is a documentary series about the idea that we can change our human being as thanks to science. And then there are scientists who say we have to go there as quick as possible because we're gonna have protests also. But if we quick, we are in front of the protest. So that's one. Then I've had an extremely difficult project that I'm still working on because my producer fucked it up because he wanted to have an editor to finish it while I was still filming abroad, and not knowing that it was about science. So I've been following three scientific laboratories where at the same time I invited an ethicist. And so it's extremely difficult to get an ethicist from outside to a laboratory. It's extremely difficult to get a cameraman in a laboratory at daily research. It's exponentially difficult to get a cameraman filming an ethicist looking in all the drawers of a scientific research, certainly when it is about some difficult subjects. But I did one in the biggest research laboratory where at the same time it's a psychiatric institute for implants for depression. I did one with a team of people in synthetic biology where they were doing changing yeast cells that they would smell tuberculosis and then turn fluorescent green. And I did one in a very special lab of Indian people working in Japan, nanotechnology, but in fact creating a kind of artificial brain with something between chemicals and all kind of things where you absolutely don't know if these people are saying the truth or not, or just trying to survive with what they say, because it was so far out. But I could invite them at the Rekveld, and even Roger Penrose is a fan of this research team, and he came over to Amsterdam to visit them. But each time I had an ethicist also there. And but these people, they were every time they were so arrogant that they thought that, well, so I can have these people, I have nothing to hide, until the moment that there is something to discuss about, and then it's stop. Okay, now it's enough. Now you can go. And I've seen it so many times, and also I've been looking for following also these ethicists. And they start to do strategies of aggression. So they want to have a PhD researcher who wants to get their strategy is to get a fight, in the hope to have that fight so that this can be presented to policymakers to get subsidies for the fact to show, like, you see how it's necessary. But so there is so. It's at this moment, it's in fact since this millennium that within all these new sciences, it's they all happen within they came at the center of ethical dispute. Before it was not that, and so everything of the science and everything of ethics was separated, and it's since this millennium that you get all these things and that they mixed, and it's this mix that interests me. And but once you really have the mix, then nothing happens. So also ethicists, for the moment, in fact, they look at the research, they see, oh, they're going to do something with an implant for people with brain damage, loss of memory, and then they see once 20 years later it comes on the market. But then what happened? Oh yeah, they use it for controlling soldiers. Yeah, all these kind of things, it's very difficult to control. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm conscious about the time, but maybe we can have a short reaction from Francis and Joost to close off. Francis, did you want to respond to what was being said just now? Or?
I don't think I really understood the question. I think the question was basically, we have science, we have art, and we can say we should be open, whereas many approaches now are very closed. Is that a recap of what the question was?
I think that it was.
As I understand it, is that apart from that we are thinking in these terms of cybernetics or feedbacks, that in policy making, and so it is more common that people go straight against all kind of democratic dispute, and so is that correct?
Yes, that's definitely true. I happen to be working in a department, technology, policy, and management, which we have groups of ethicists and we have groups of policymakers and we have advice. But indeed, the question is, and most of the research, if you look into it, policy advice is provided, models are provided, but there's no guarantee they'll pick up on it. And I think that really is the point you make. The political situation will define what their choices will be. And I think now with Corona, we're seeing that right, left, and center, that this has nothing to do with normal thinking. This has much more to do with politics and the implications for the individuals. And can we influence that? I think the only way to influence that is to really become disruptive. And I think that may actually happen.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it. I mean, we Rotterdam exploded recently, right? That's not what we want to happen, but it may be necessary.
I think that COVID is now a good example that, in fact, you can say that they listen to people, but probably they listen to the wrong ones. So sometimes they come up with new policies, or so that you think like, where did they get it from? Who are the lobbyists that came up with these ideas? While you always hear that the scientists had completely proposed other things.
But there was before Corona appeared, many of the municipalities were actually thinking of changing their role. I'm talking municipalities, not government, not the top level government, not well, there's politics at the municipality level as well, but more the notion that their role should be more facilitatory, and instead of determining. And that was actually starting to move, but I think it's come to a very quick halt right now.
Joost, sorry. Joost, did you want to say something? Or as a response, as a last one maybe?
No, perhaps, I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but I was reading, not so long ago, I was reading a great book by, I think it's called Jean-Baptiste Fresso. It's called L'Apocalypse Joyeuse. And it's about, it's basically about the history of, well, there's a couple of histories, and one of the histories is, which I thought was very interesting, I didn't know anything about it. It's basically about the history of the beginning of the chemical industry. And what he sort of shows in there is that when the first chemical factories were introduced in France, so that's somewhere like late 18th century, early 19th century, there was actually a whole old system of law in place where it was not possible for an entrepreneur just to put a polluting factory somewhere, because people would complain, and then he would basically not have the right to do this. And then what he shows is that very slowly over the course of a century, all the law, like through progressive lobbying and governments, all the laws were changed in such a way that it became possible for the central state to override local communities and basically just plant a factory there because it was good for the economy. And of course, I mean, it sort of paints a picture also a bit of you know, small communities, and this was 18th century, so it's easy to sort of think of it as a kind of pastoral ideal or something. But what I do really find very interesting is that these ideas of that it's actually not the society, not the communities themselves who decide, but others from outside. That's also something which is constructed and which has been constructed over a very long time, so that now we think that's how things should be done, and that it's logical that a company like Facebook can decide how certain things work because they own it. And that's so, yeah, so what I found very interesting is to see that logic is actually also something which has been constructed, and which also means that it could have been otherwise, and also means that it can still be otherwise.
Yeah. Alexander, how are we in time? I think we need to close down, unfortunately, because I feel that the conversation could go on, but we've been an hour.
Well, just let's, we're limited 1 hour, but in general, if somebody have a question, maybe from auditorium, that you will be welcome, just because everybody here. But because the subject itself is very interesting, because if we go and we are thinking about us, like human on this earth, and just I was always thinking, sitting here, about the book, just one of my favorite book, Franz de Waal, about politics of chimpanzee. And normally in this book, what he is stating, that we are like a primate, but he don't talk about us, we talk about chimpanzee. Society is looking always for a power. And power technology is also the power. And so this is, we are still in our thinking, just that goes much more to the way to find something that not really good for a society, but good for our prosperity but for ourselves. So, but if somebody have a question, so maybe, yes.
Can you turn the camera? It's so
Yes,
nice to see the audience, if possible.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask regarding the climate change. I was wondering, do you think that if there are more exhibitions like yours, and like if it makes it out in the community, like if we make more media appearance about these topics, that this could potentially change the behavior of politicians and maybe future decisions for humanity? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much that I may answer such a question, but or that you like the exhibition, but well, I hope that more people would do these kind of things. It was for me, it was a crazy work. It's extremely and it's not finished in the sense that also, well, I'm waiting for a bigger computer to be able to show everything that we prepared already so far. And I would hope to have also students involved from history or from programming also to add more details in countries also. Or there are people who working on this kind of things, I think. I know that it will take part my installation of an exhibition in the Beaux-Arts in May about art and climate change. But in fact, I'm not so aware about other artists so much who are working on this also. But I think that it is just, I think that what Greta Thunberg, yeah. I'm sorry that I forgot her name, but when you pronounce it, and no, and all the other people, all these young people, so they bring it always in the actuality, and that is really changing things. So it is a matter of, I think that as much as people talk about it. Politicians, they respond, and in that sense, they're not responding. So they are somehow connected to some kind of a cybernetics, in the sense that they always turn towards where they think that the voices or the powers are coming, so the more this is an actuality, and the more that they think that this is where they can lose or win votes for, also it will change in that sense somehow, I think.
Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, then I think we should end the conversation for now, which is a bit weird to do from here. But thanks anyway for. I feel there's still a lot more to talk about, and I'm really sorry that I can't be there. But thanks for your collaboration, and looking forward to meeting you in live, in the live version. And hope to see the audience that I don't see now, but next year for our next laser talk, which we plan to schedule beginning of March. So we'll keep you updated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to Imal that hosted our event. So, and we will continue working here. So just, and I hope maybe next time Francis will be here also with us. Because Lucia, she's presented also here, so just it will be really good, and it will, if it will be more people, bring people together in this space. And thank you very much for coming. And
yeah, I think also, I mean, I really like the idea that the people that have taken part in the laser talks will continue to follow what we're doing, and that it can be a kind of community that can be disruptive, as Francis says, and can continue thinking disruptive in a disruptive kind of way, and creative kind of way. Thanks again.
thank you.
Thank you.